Now, we have a caller from Universidad Tecnológica de Panama in Panama, so go ahead, please.
From the Technological University of Panama, here we have our question. How can you motivate students, university students, to use in an efficient and effective way all the Internet resources? Thank you.
Well, maybe I should take a stab at that one first, since I'm currently a university professor. One simple way is to require it. In my class, who's here at the studio today, we require them to send papers to me via email and to have internet connections, and so that's one part of it. But of course, in some countries that's not practical. But I think you do it by showing them the tremendous power of the internet to access information. It is unprecedented what you can find in any language, on any topic on the internet.
Well, you know, this is exactly the challenge that we faced at what we call the classroom for the 21st century at Mountain Empire High School here in San Diego, which, by the way, is only 40 miles from downtown San Diego, did not have internet. So we brought internet into the school with satellite, put in a very nice classroom. And may I comment one thing? The classroom shown in the presentation here was actually at a cyber cafe, not at the school. The school's substantially more elaborate. Anyway, the point being, what happened was the kids who were underachievers, didn't show up to class, so on and so forth, that participated in Classroom 21, got engrossed in computers, got engrossed in the internet, because there was no really restrictions placed on them. And the teacher became a facilitator, not a dictator, not just strictly a presenter of information. It was a person that was nurturing them to learn what they could find on the internet. And they did things like look at World War II. Now, they've heard the U.S. version of World War II, but they got onto Japanese websites and onto German websites, and they came up with a completely different view. And it was exciting. And they turned that into a PowerPoint presentation and made it to their PowerPoint presentation to their fellow students. And that caused those students to move from the bottom of the Sat-9 test right up into the middle, because they got enthusiastic about the computers and getting on the internet. And I think it's a matter of the way it's presented to them.
Dr. Badger, anything to add to this?
Well, you know, again, I think that this is a question that is being asked at a very good time, because even you know, ITC's own Dr. Miguel Cardenas has started examining this in a paper that I just read of his about the need to organize a strategy for maximizing the tools, not just having them be used randomly. And by doing it randomly, you miss the opportunity to really maximize the exchange of ideas. And two, we don't have a discipline then that would actually start building a platform and a foundation for going to the next level adequately. So, you know, encouraging people to use all the technologies, that's very good. I think the next thing is that there needs to be this some sort of methodology, or at least some discipline, to be able to understand, okay, what is the appropriate technology, so that we don't waste time or get frustrated because we couldn't communicate our ideas as well as if we just made another choice on which technology to use. So, all very good questions. Very, very good. And I think that thoughtful people right now are starting to ask those questions and spending time on the answers.
Thanks, Dr. Badger. We now have a question from Centro Universitario de Tijuana in the campus in Mexicali, Mexico, in Baja California. Go ahead, please.
We're questioning ourselves whether or not we know the percentage of institutions and companies base their decisions on the internet, information obtained through internet, and if you could give us some comparative figures between Mexico, United States, and Latin America as far as percentage of usage of information obtained from Internet, for example, if you would have that information?
I'm not sure we do have that information. We do know this, that the Internet is, in its inception, was a uniquely American phenomenon. Just recently, the United States is no longer the majority of Internet servers and users in the world. We have about 140 million users in the United States, but now there's about 160 million worldwide. So it's diffusing rapidly to other places. So I don't know if we have information on the extent to which businesses in various countries use it, but it certainly has been more popular as an American medium and is now rapidly diffusing and spreading to the rest of the world. Gentlemen, anything to add to that?
Well, I do know that the two countries with the highest penetration of Internet are Mexico and Brazil, followed, I think, by Argentina.
Among Latin American countries.
Of Latin American countries, and that's the area that I've been specializing in. And the number of Internet users, for example, in Mexico has doubled in the last year. It's up to, as I recall correctly, 6-some million users now in Mexico. So it's growing very, very rapidly.
Mark, anything to add to that?
No, I think, when we look at how institutions in my area is government, the studies have just pointed out that Canada has just become sort of the #1 e-government country in the world. And when you think about that, it means that there are more services being offered from government agencies on the Internet. And they're starting to face one of the big challenges of what is it like, how do they overcome the barriers to integration so that different departments in the government actually are serving the public with one face. And so they've gotten out to a level where they are starting to look at the difficulties of having multiple departments actually running on their own systems and offering different levels of service, and they're starting to look at how they can integrate that. Singapore actually, I think, has the highest connectivity per capita in the world now.
Yeah,
and,
per capita.
Right, and it's an odd thing because it's a small country. But what they've done is they made a commitment to have broadband or high-speed connectivity to everyone's house. Mm-hmm. And many of the important services for the government there are on the net, and that largely comes out as defense. So every member of the Singapore population has some defense role, and training is done on the Internet, request for leave is done on the Internet, those sorts of things. So, you've got these different extremes going on, but it's certainly, there are lots of different examples of nations taking this on very aggressively.
Okay, we have time for one final call before we go to our next taped session, and that is from Peru, from the Universidad Ricardo Palma in Lima. Go ahead, please.
Congratulations for your wonderful presentation. I would like to ask the following question. What is the reason why the use of WAN protocols have not been for the telephone systems? They haven't been put in a massive way out there on the telephone systems, the use of these protocols.
Okay, questions about Internet protocols, Internet telephony. Want to go ahead and take that one?
Well, I'm sure Mark can reinforce. What happens is that the equipment in a telephone network is optimized for the transmission of voice, not necessarily for the transmission of data, even though the transmission of the voice is digitized. There's, over the years, always been each company having their own protocol, always the issues of interface, and you can't believe the number of protocols there have been. The really good news about Internet has a common protocol, the IP protocol, and it is sweeping the world, and that's going to make it a lot easier. Now, the telephone companies can integrate a single protocol into their system, and I think that'll dramatically improve the quality of service. Mark, do you have...
Yes, I think you're right. I think we're, again, on the verge of a shift. I think the other factor in why there's not a very common or homogeneous protocol right now is that companies around the world have heavy investments in the old technology. So you've got, PBX, standard analog switches that companies have their capital money tied up in, and the idea of putting that aside and moving to a new internet protocol, it's being met with resistance.
Right. Although it is becoming more and more widespread, and in fact some independent telephone companies using Internet protocol have grown up and actually have competed quite successfully in the global economy. As we get greater and greater bandwidth on the Internet too, the kinds of glitches and delays and such in Internet protocol telephony will probably go away, and in fact you're seeing all of the major phone companies experimenting and or using Internet telephony. One of the things you probably don't realize is that there is some chance that when you made a phone call, it was actually on an Internet protocol rather than on a conventionally switched system. Well, thank you for your questions. Now we need to move to the second module of our program, in which Dr. Mark Badger, who's here with us via telephone line and was here in San Diego earlier this week, will explain a little bit about the latest information technologies which are poised to become the latest facilitators of decision-making in today's global organizations.
Thank you. As I prepared for this session, I found myself in a bit of a predicament, somewhat like asking a fish to describe water. How does one describe this sea of technology that leads to better decision-making? How does one describe the technologies that enable collaboration and enforce a culture of sharing, each toward the ends of making better decision-making, while being immersed in an environment of relying on these very technologies? I had to stop and take myself back to my early days of discussing these ideas, only about 6 years ago, to a conference of government business leaders, before I could begin to understand the current state of the art. I have not always worked at Cisco, a place that very much practices what it preaches. Before Cisco, I was a government chief information officer, and my job was to bring a better understanding and practice of how networks, communications, and technologies could work together to improve the business of decision-making. It was not easy then. I remember talking about collaboration as a concept to many people who thought the Internet was a fleeting fancy, a fad, and the idea of technologies, software, hardware, and using networks for sharing multiple applications, a real fantasy, an esoteric indulgence. But today it is much more than a theory, a nice idea, or a maybe someday it will happen concept. It is the way life has evolved, central to everything from building jet aircraft to solo sailors circumnavigating the world. Those activities that have traditionally been solitary efforts have become both literally and figuratively global activities. You can pick up nearly any general news magazine today to see the idea of network collaboration being used in a myriad of ways. For example, Newsweek recently ran an article written by a woman who lives on a sailboat and, of course, remains connected to family, friends, and political activities while at sea. Daily email supplies land-based friends with a constant set of latitude and longitude coordinates obtained from global positioning satellites. But she also calls on this network of colleagues when making a decision, even about selecting a port at which to make repairs. Once, while having trouble in the Caribbean, she sought advice from her virtual community about where to seek ship repairs. Finding out there was a carnival in Jamaica contributed to their decision. The Royal Jamaican would be our best bet for immediate dry docking, accompanied by calypso and reggae music. Using wireless modem connections to update her cruise web page, this too has become a platform for political decision-making. After discovering that unfair port taxes and fees were being exacted on her vessel, she began a campaign of protest which drew together another 25 yachts into the discussion and caught the attention of the European community in Brussels. Laws were changed to protect entry procedures for European citizens. And all of this from a tiny speck in the sea. This may all seem familiar to most of us today, the strength of the net linking people and issues to bring about more participatory decisions. But the capability of business applications for collaboration and group decision-making have never been greater. But what is even more important, these technologies are becoming commonplace. And in the workplace, where these practices are actively promoted, the shift in behavior is termed e-culture. It is taking root. And more than the technologies, the change in behavior may be what is having a more fundamental effect today. Let me explain. The day begins by turning on a personal laptop computer that has a web browser, calendar, and email client. Activating the calendar brings up the appointments you have scheduled, as well as those that people want to have with you. After reading the invitations, you decide whether you want to participate, and you look at a colleague's calendar to see that you will be attending the same conference call later in the day. You schedule a web briefing to go over the slides that will be presented later in the day. You log on through the web to a site that is used for sharing PowerPoint presentations. Upload the slides, and the application automatically invites the colleague to a web meeting. This takes about 2 minutes. An instant messenger note comes back showing that your colleague accepts the meeting. More and more businesses are routinely using these technologies to grow a more intelligent workforce. When you log on to the site, you see a graphic of a conference table with 2 icons seated around the table. The icon changes colors when the participants are ready. The conference begins, and each member can either make comments on the slide presentation directly or critique the content on the phone as the rehearsal moves forward. At one point, the group asks to see the backup data for an assertion made in the presentation. You go to the information site where the data is housed and put your browser on live. Here, everyone can see the same information and even pursue the links themselves. This method of collaborating brings together differing points of view while being able to consider the information learned for the participants' own future endeavors. This is the cross-pollination that is taking hold in institutions around the world as this type of technology becomes more pervasive, and as more businesses and institutions move that data that often require the assistance of a clerk to access. Information is now more available to individual employees or members of the organization. Key to this environment is direct access to data, reducing one of the largest expenses in business, overhead. Audio conferencing generally requires administrative assistance to schedule a meeting. You call the service bureau, obtain a call-in number, and notify all attendees. The hidden administrative costs associated with this approach are high. Security poses another problem in that sometimes callers are misdirected into your confidential conference. The number of applications that allow the sharing of web pages, whiteboards, including voice and video, is on the rise. At Cisco, we call this Advanced Voice Video Integrated Data, or AVID, and it is in use worldwide. In the rough, there are three components that are needed to set a course for maximizing the e-tools available today for improved decision-making. These are infrastructure, Internet protocol appliances, and workforce optimization and e-culture. Infrastructure means more than just the network and the associated technologies that ride on the network. It means there must be a set of applications that a business needs that will ride on the network. You can call this infrastructure. But let's start with the network. In the past, there have been a number of separate wires that run through the walls of an office or business to reach all the different computers and hardware pieces. Multiple networks proliferated until Internet Protocol, or IP networks, became the standard. With an IP network, the number of networks is reduced to one, and it begins to operate like an electric utility or an electrical service that reaches your wall outlet, where the wall outlet supports a number of appliances. The network identifies what sort of services it receives based on an IP address and a policy direction of convergence. With convergence, voice, video, and data all share the same network, making it easy to reach everyone through a common set of standards and allowing different technologies to communicate with each other. The World Wide Web began to bring a convergence of sorts when it was first invented, bringing the printed page with all of its familiar features, color, different typefaces, photos, together with the computer screen. Remember, the early Internet images were green phosphorescent screens with characters blinking on a small television. The same computer language that made the web possible, HTML, now is being delivered on the telephone. And with new languages like XML, different data can be accessed from different platforms, allowing even more convergence. Nowhere is convergence more vivid than when combining web services with such a universal device as the telephone. Furthermore, the fact that traditional telephone voice communication is now mostly transferred across networks as data means that other traditionally separated technologies can be brought together in a unified messaging system. Hearing your email on the telephone or accessing your personal phone directory through voice commands are just two examples of how these technologies are merging. The exciting aspect of this is that all of what I have been talking about is happening today, not as trials or prototypes, but as proven second and third generation applications. Let me explain a little further about how phones that are replacing the old analog or PBX technologies in offices, clinics, and schools are providing a leap forward as a platform for bringing together information resources, whether on a desktop or hanging from a bus stop wall. These phones contain a web client that allows them to bring together things such as directory lookups and many other future applications. For example, the Cisco IP phone's HTTP client performs an HTTP GET for a specified URL. The HTTP server processes this request and returns an XML object or plain text. The phone processes the supported HTTP headers. The phone then presents data and options to the user per the server response. Now, all this means that many new services that have normally been isolated or unassisted by something so ubiquitous as the telephone are available, taking many of the process tasks off the daily priority list and making room for more intelligent use of time, like considering the best course of strategic action. Schools are moving to these IP appliances, linking them to student databases for mundane functions such as attendance, contact information, and security. By entering a name on the IP phone, when it is linked to a course schedule, the current classroom location of the student is displayed on the screen from any telephone on the system. Security codes and privacy considerations are built in. Hospitals are deploying IP networks for better diagnosis, improved transfer of knowledge about individual patients, and for the sharing of medical pictures. Universities are providing online registration from individual phone screens as well as event schedules and university bulletins that scroll on any of the IP devices or IP phones. I mention these only to demonstrate the significant change this simple device is just now undergoing. We are on the verge of seeing tremendous utility added to Mr. Bell's ringer. The basic underpinnings of these changes occurred when the technology of IP network design and implementation occurred. The changes that these technologies bring to the workplace and human behavior are often seen as having their own pace and way of unfolding. But this premise is being challenged, more as businesses see their adoption necessary for economic survival. Let's look now at the topics of workforce optimization and e-culture. Workforce optimization, or WO, is defined as the combination of applications and practices that empower the workforce, shape the culture, perform administrative tasks, create a learning environment, and develop leadership to optimize the organizational effectiveness. The goal of workforce optimization is to change the organization's behavior, a shift towards sharing information and empowering the workforce to act on its own behalf without artificial bottlenecks built into the process. Creating a robust platform of universal access is a key enabler for change. Workforce optimization strives to create an environment where employees have the right information at the right time and the ability to act on it. It is critical to have both components, as information without empowerment leads to frustration and disuse, and empowerment without information will lead to bad decisions. Empowerment is a much overused word over the last few years. However, Cisco has designed and deployed key applications that empower our employees to make key decisions responsibly. To be empowered, you need just-in-time accurate information and the authority and accountability to make decisions. To enable this skill development is central to managers today. So a major thrust in my company is to create an environment where active learning thrives. 80% of all learning is done in informal settings, meaning on the web. Why does culture matter? Because culture is a powerful force. Because when there is a culture of responsibility and people are held accountable for their own learning portfolio, professional development is enhanced. And all of this because the process of decision-making and knowledge transfer is so rapid. It is not the speed that is paramount here, but rather the quality of the decision and being confident that it is fully informed. That is the most relevant. In this light, the results have unanticipated results. For example, one of the stories about Silicon Valley is that you can have coffee with a developer and a new program emerges as a result of that encounter. This is not myth. I've actually experienced such a genesis. But I would not say that these events are as a result of random chance. I would posit that they are a direct result of an open, collaborative atmosphere that's supported by a baseline of confidence, and that 1, ideas and proposals are tethered to an agreed set of principles and standards. 2, the advancement of an idea does not occur without determining its worthiness among an informed group of knowledgeable advisors. And 3, a work environment that is transitioned to an e-culture directly enhances the speed of development. The overall effect of placing as many of the routine tasks as well as research data on the web for employees to readily use is to eliminate the fear or apprehension that this is an effective or even wise thing to do. The result or impact is profoundly visible in new products brought to market. But what does it really take to make all of this happen? In the case of businesses and organizations, it means applying a level of commitment and leadership to the enterprise's information technology deployment. Directing that a culture of sharing and accountability will occur and empowering the employees with the tools to grow and act responsibly. What this does is establish a network of knowledge workers instead of a repetitive data entry workers, lowering the size of the organization's overhead. But most importantly, establishing the platform for broader decision-making and ownership of the results. Each of us has far more information available to us than we can possibly keep up with on a daily basis. What is being sought is a way to continue to grow in understanding of areas that we are interested in and have a general reduction in the amount of process activity that we don't want to be bothered with.